Okay, is everyone ready to get going? We'll start the seminar, and then it's aimed for about 4 hours or so with breaks, so it's not 4 straight hours, but we're going to try and do this hopefully in a little bit less time. But welcome everybody. So this session is about retirement planning, a little bit of retirement education, just to give you some more information regarding your plan, some of the other pieces in terms of the financial aspects, and then some of the health and lifestyle components that go into retirement planning as well. So my name is Tyler Smith. I'm a consultant with Coughlin Associates. We are the administrators for the plan. So when you have questions about your pension plan, whether it's for starting your retirement or your contributions, any of the information, payroll that comes in, we do all of that work to make sure that your pension is accruing and that you're getting your pension options on time, and ultimately you can retire with your pension at the point where you want to retire. The reason we are now the administrators is actually because the prior administrator and executive director of MEPP retired last year. So coincidentally, that's when we came on board. So these retirement sessions, they've been on and off for a little while. Before this, it was a financial planner that used to do it. And they said, well, when you take over the plan, as the administrators, you get to do these retirement sessions. And we said, okay, no problem. Said, you're going to have to go all over the province to do this. Said, okay, we can work with that. And then they said, they're an hour or a day and a half long. And we said, no, that's not happening. And I think for people that have done this before, that's a long time. So like I said, we're keeping it to 4 hours because you can't learn everything that you need about retirement in a day and a half or 4 hours. But the idea is to give you enough information to ask better questions, give you some direction as to where you want to go, and to help you start discussions, whether with your work, but also most importantly with the people in your lives that you're going to be spending with them in retirement, whether that's your spouse, your family, friends, but to get you prepared for those pieces as well. So we're going to go through a few different pieces, as I said. So what changes in retirement? Well, obviously there's a financial change. You're no longer working. We're going to talk about the financial changes. What goes into that? We're going to talk a little bit about health, your health in retirement. It's a big part of it. What you can do in retirement, what you plan to do in retirement. Your health is pretty vital to what you're going to be able to do and how much you can enjoy your retirement. And then really the lifestyle change. Because think about it, you're going from working day in and day out to a opportunity where you have flexibility to do what you want in retirement, whether that is not work, whether it's changed to part-time work, volunteering, but you're going to have a very different lifestyle than you did the day before you retired. So the agenda, we'll talk about the retirement income for the first half of the session or so. That'll be including understanding your pension plan. So we're going to talk about the MEPP plan itself, give you a little bit of detail there so that if you don't know how your plan works, we'll try and provide you some context around that. Understanding how your pension statement works. So every year you get this piece of paper in the mail, tells you what you've accrued. So we'll walk through that just so you understand how that is used. Government benefits, CPP, OAS, the different types of income that you're going to receive from the government in retirement, and then your personal savings. And then we'll talk a little about how you actually use those pieces to turn your savings into retirement income. Then we'll take a brief break because that'll be a lot to digest. And then what we'll do is we'll talk about planning for retirement. What do you do in retirement? The healthcare, what changes in terms of costs, managing your new career, and then planning for the future. So a little bit on insurance needs, estate planning, and question and answer. If there are questions through the presentation, feel free to ask them. I am limited to about this far because of the microphone, so I can't go much further to wander the questions, so you'll have to speak up if you have any questions. But I will try and answer whatever I can as well. If you have personal questions, then we can either discuss them during the break or after the session if you have something specific to your retirement that you want to talk about when it comes to the plan. Okay, so let's talk about the financial change. So in a lot of cases, what happens is when you see the ads on TV, you see insurance commercials, they talk about the bright future, heading into your retirement. And some people picture this long road that gets you to retirement where it's blue skies, it's a path, you're trying to get there. But the path to retirement looks a lot less like that, probably a lot more like that, right? It's not a simple thing to do. It's not a simple place to get to. There's a lot of twists and turns in life, and they're going to affect your ability to get to retirement. How you manage to get there is ultimately up to you. But you have to be adaptable, and you have to understand that it's not a straight road to get there. And I think this is stuck. But if we take a look, I mean, you can use this for pretty much any analogy. So if you have kids, you're going all over the place with your kids, your marriage, your life. Retirement is no different. It's a flexible plan that you have to try and negotiate and navigate. It's not clear, and things are going to change in your life. You have to be adaptable. Retirement's the same as any other piece of your life. What we're going to try and do is at least give you a blueprint and a roadmap of how to get there. Ultimately, when you get there and how you get there in terms of the route is going to be up to you. So sources in retirement. There's really 3 different types of sources in retirement. Has anyone heard of the 3-legged stool analogy for retirement and income? No? So the idea is that the more legs you have on the stool, the more stable it is, right? And so looking at a 1-legged stool, if you have one source of income in retirement, what do you have? You have one, you have a pretty terrible stool, right? It's not going to be very effective. But it also doesn't give you a lot of flexibility when it comes to if something happens in retirement and how you're going to be able to adapt to it. So there's 3 sources. There's the employer/employee plan. So that is what we're going to talk about with MEPP. There is the government plans, and then there's personal savings. So a combination of the 3 allows you to have flexibility in retirement, but also a stable income that you know you can depend on. You're going to have different pieces that are going to be consistent. They're going to be month after month. They're going to be the same amount. And then you're going to have pieces where you're going to be flexible in terms of if you need to spend more or want to spend a little bit less, you'll have some ability to adapt to that and spend when you want to spend. So the idea of the employer plan. So let's talk about MEPP. So MEPP is what is called a defined benefit pension plan. Does anyone know what a defined benefit pension plan is? How it works? Are you familiar? There's really 2 types of pension plans out there, defined benefit and defined contribution. So if you have a prior employer where you had a defined contribution, or if you have a spouse or something that has a DC plan, there's 2 different types of pension plans. Group RSPs sort of fall to DC plans as well. Defined contribution plan is where a percent of your pay goes into an account, it's invested, you pick from a series of funds, and at the end of the day when you retire, you have an account balance that you can use to draw your income from, and you have flexibility to pick how much you want. What's defined is the amount that goes in. What comes out the other end is ultimately unknown because you don't know how your investment return is going to do, how you invest the money, when you're going to retire. And so it's a little bit more flexible, but it's also an unknown when it comes to the retirement side. Defined benefit plan works the opposite. What's defined is ultimately the amount you're going to have in retirement. Month after month, you're going to know you have an income stream that comes in, for example, $1,000 a month. It's going to happen month after month after month for the rest of your life. So the actual benefit is defined based on a formula that you earn during your working years. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. So MEPP, as a defined benefit plan, has both member and employee contribution, or member and employer contributions. These contributions are put into a large fund for everybody's benefits. So with the defined contribution plan, your funds go into your own account. They're managed individually by you. That's your money. With the defined benefit plan, the money is collectively pooled together for everybody's retirement. What you're doing is actually putting together combining the efficiencies of investments because you have larger amounts to invest, so you can get reductions on fees, you get better scale on investments, but also pooling of life risk. If you think about life insurance, when you buy a life insurance policy, the policy is put together with a whole bunch of other policies in case one person dies, but other people are going to live longer, and that's how they offset the risk. The pension plan's the same way, in that in order to make sure that we can make payments for everybody for the remainder of their lifetime, we're collectively putting the money together because some people will live shorter and some people will live longer than others. And so that whole pooling levels out the risk of being able to ensure we can provide pension to everybody for their lifetime. So when it comes to the contributions, I'm sure you all see that number come off of your paycheck every 2 weeks or every month. It's a big number, 8.3% below what is called the year's maximum pensionable earnings, or the YMPE. So that's the amount that you end up contributing up to for CPP, for the Canada Pension Plan. And this plan is what we call integrated with Canada Pension Plan. So there's a lower amount when you're contributing to the Canada Pension Plan because you already have other contributions coming off of your paycheck. And then once you hit that limit, which is about $57,000, it goes up to 9.5% after the YMP. So what I can tell you is, yes, it's a pretty pricey amount to come off of your paycheck, but relative to the benefit that you get out of it and the amount that you get in terms of your pension and the formula, it's actually a very reasonable deal. There are a number of plans out there, especially in the public sector, where those contributions are higher and the benefits are similar. Some groups are paying 11 and 14, some are paying 9 and 13. So on a relative basis, 8.3 and 9.5 is actually not too bad. If you think about it, it's almost like just putting 10% away into your RRSPs every year, except this is going to a pension plan instead. Similarly, the employers contribute an equal amount to the plan, and if there's other funding requirements, they may put in more. So there's two components that go into it. Ultimately, contributions are being matched at a minimum by your employer. If not, if there's situations where the fund needs more money, they will be putting in more. You can see there's two pieces there if you're participating in the disability income plan or not participating in the disability income plan. So depending on if your group participates in the disability plan, the rates are slightly less. If you're not, they're slightly higher. The reason is because the disability plan is another contribution on top of that. So they reduced it by 0.1 because of the other funding that goes into the disability plan as well. So example of contributions and how your money goes into the plan. So if you're an individual who's earning $40,000 a year, what happens is you're going to take, and you're not participating in the disability plan, take 40,000 times 8.4%. Your contributions are $3,300 or $3,360 a year. That's what you're putting away. That's what the employer is also putting into the pension plan to fund your benefit. If you're, for example, earning $65,000 a year, where again, you have money that is, or you're earning over the YMPE, then the formula breaks up into two pieces. So up to the YMPE, the $57,400, you're putting in 8.4%. After that, you're putting in 9.6% on the remaining $7,600. So you're putting in about $5,500 a year towards your pension. So you do that year over year, and ultimately what's going to happen is you're going to get to a point where you can retire. So when can you actually retire from MEPP? Well, you can retire as early as age 55 if you would like, if you're ready. Are you ready or are you financially ready? There's two different answers. But age 55, you can retire. And age 65 is what we call normal retirement. And it's called normal retirement because that's the date that's aligned with when your Canada Pension Plan and Old Age Security are commensable without reduction. So CPP, you can start a little bit earlier, and we're going to talk about that, but it's unreduced at age 65. Old Age Security starts at age 65. So that's considered normal retirement for the plan because it lines up with those two dates. If you don't want to retire because you really like what you're doing, and normally there's one or two people that do, and the rest of them are, no, I still got to just be here. But age 71, we call that postponed retirement. And so you can delay your retirement out of MEPP up to age 71. At that point, the government, the CRA, requires you to start drawing your pension. So it's an Income Tax Act rule that requires that your pension starts by the end of the year in which you turn age 71. So you can't defer it any longer, but if you keep working up to that point, you still accrue pension up to age 71. At that point, the pensions will start, contributions will stop. So even if you're working, you have to start drawing your pension and your contributions stop. You can't keep accruing pension in the plan. Okay? So the question is, how much do you actually get out of this plan? You know, what is it worth? So the formula for this plan is 1.5% of your final average earnings below the final average CPP. So I talked about that YMPE, the amount you contribute up to the CPP. This plan has a 1.5% formula for all your earnings that go up to that point. And we'll show you an example in a minute. And once you hit that CPP threshold, the YMP threshold, everything above that is calculated at 2% of your final average earnings. And then you multiply that by how long you've been in the plan. So if you've been in the plan for 25 to 30 years, you're looking at a replacement ratio of your income of about 40 to 45% before you add in old age security, before you add in CPP, before you add in any savings. So that's a fairly healthy component in terms of income in retirement already from your pension plan. Your final average earnings are based on your 5 highest years of earnings in the plan. So it's going to look at your entire history of work, and it's going to take the years with the 5 highest years of earnings. If you're part-time, what they'll do is they'll look at it and figure out which periods of earnings actually give you a total of the 5 highest average earnings and use that to calculate the final average 5. The final average CPP will be based on the same years as the earnings, and that's how they'll calculate the two pieces. So if we go to an example of an individual who's been in the plan for 25 years and decides to retire at age 65. So this individual started at age 40. Some of you have probably started earlier. Some of you, this may be a relevant example. And we take a look at the earnings from 2014 to 2019. We could have 25 years of history, but we're just going to say these last few years were the highest. So let's just take a look at these. And what you can see is 60, 65,000, 50,000. So apparently whatever you were doing in 2016, you just decided to take a break from work. So you made a little bit less. 2017, 2018, 2019, 65,000. And then you have the YMP, so the amount that you contributed up to on CPP. So what will happen is that 2016 year will get taken out of the calculation. And they'll look at those other 5 years and say, okay, well, what's the highest average or the final average earnings for those? So they'll take the 65,000 and the 60,000 and say the final average earnings is 64,000. That's the average of those 5 years. Same thing with those YMPEs. It's 54, just under 55,000. And then they'll apply the formula. So they'll take 1.5% up to that 54,940, and then 2% for everything above that. And what that will do is come out with a number of about $1,000. And then it should say 95, should say $1,000 times 25 years. So 1,000 times 25, ultimately you get about $25,000 in pension income a year. So you're going to get about 1,000, you're going to get about $2,000 a month in monthly pension from this type of example. Okay?
And that never changes?
That never changes, yeah.
So as inflation takes over and everything costs more, your pension stays the same?
Potentially. So this plan has the ability, if there's enough money in the plan, to provide cost of living increases. So the plan is designed that if the fund has enough money, they can provide cost of living increases to pensioners to offset some of the inflation. But the strategy right now is protection of the base benefits. Currently, the plan is right around 100% funded. So in order to provide cost of living adjustments, we need to get a little bit higher, because ultimately we can't put the plan in an underfunded position just to provide cost of living increases.
Are you at all in the, I've just been talking with another company, and they went from defined benefits, they've switched to defined contributions.
Yep.
Midstream.
Yep.
Is that something that would ever happen with this?
Okay. So the question is, could this plan ever change from a defined benefit plan to a defined contribution plan, because employers sometimes switch plans? The answer is it's highly unlikely. It could happen, but it's very, very unlikely, because it would take a lot of changes and a redesign to the plan. This plan is not designed to work like that. The plan is ultimately designed to be a defined benefit plan. It's currently under special legislation in the Pension Benefits Act, so it doesn't have some of the same funding issues that a single employer plan might have. So a lot of companies may be switching. Unlikely this plan will ever do that. The idea is to be a defined benefit plan and to remain a defined benefit plan indefinitely into the future. So I would be highly surprised if it ever went to a DC plan. It's should actually be 1,005. So the numbers got updated for 2019, but that one number is missed. But ultimately, 25,000 is based off of that. So that should just be 1,000. Okay. Okay. So you can retire, as we said, any point prior to age 65, as long as you've reached age 55. And then there are reductions. The reason for the reductions in the pension plan, if you decide to retire early, is you're going to be paid out over a longer period of time. If you had a $100,000 and you decide to take it start taking a income at age 55 versus starting to draw down on that at age 65, can you take the same amount out? Unlikely, because you have to fund it over 10 more years. You're making it last 10 more years than you would at age 65. That's the same idea with the plan here, is that there are reductions depending on your service in the plan and when you decide to retire. So if you hit age 55 and you do not have 80 points, points are defined as your age and your years of service in the plan. So if you take those two and add them together and you have 80, the plan, you have an unreduced pension. So has anyone heard of the term the magic 80? Yep. Okay. So that's your magic 80, is that your service and your age combined, when you hit 80 points, as long as you're 55, you can retire without any sort of reduction to your pension. If you don't have 80 points, what happens is there's a reduction of 0.75% per year from age 60 for pre-1991 service. So it's a little more generous before 1991. In 1991, the Income Tax Act rules changed. So the plan had to change because they set minimum requirements for reductions at that point. So after that, any service post 1990 or 1991 and beyond, it's 3% from age 60 for post 1990 service if you don't have the 80 points. So if you have the 80 points and you're 55, it's still unreduced, right? But if you don't have 80 points and you decide to go at 55, then it's going to be reduced by 3% per month or per year. So ultimately a 15% reduction on your pension from what it would be at age 60. If you hit age 60, it's going to be unreduced no matter what. Any questions? No? Okay. So again, we have early retirement, and that would be early retirement with a penalty if you don't have 80 points. You have the period of unreduced retirement, so anytime between 60 and 65, if you decide to go, you can retire without any sort of reduction. And if you decide to keep working until after age 65, up to age 71, that's your postponed retirement period. Okay, so as I mentioned, if you have 80 points, you can be unreduced all the way from age 55. There's another component to this plan for those that retire early, and it's called a bridge benefit. So a bridge benefit is a temporary pension that you get for a certain period of time. If you decide to retire before age 60, you are eligible for a bridge benefit that's payable to age 60. So the bridge benefit is ultimately a short-term pension that's supposed to bridge the gap until you can start CPP at its earliest date. So you can retire and you can actually take CPP as early as age 60. If you go before that, the plan will give you a little bit of an enhancement to cover you off until you can start your CPP, at which case that bridge benefit would drop off and CPP would kick in, so that ultimately what they're trying to do is level it off so that you have sort of an equal amount of pension throughout.
I was wondering, where does the supplement come from? Well, if you retire, say, 57,
yep.
You have 3 years to 60. Where does that supplement come from?
Where does the supplement come from in terms of the funding of it?
Yeah, so where's that bridge from?
So the bridge benefit and any early retirement reductions are all designed and are part of the plan. So it's all one fund, and when the plan was designed, the contributions you put in, the way the plan gets valued by the actuary, it's all taking into account that there are bridge benefits available for people, that there's early retirement reductions. So it actually looks at every individual and does projections on likelihood of when you might go and what that might cost. And also all that's built into the funding of the plan. It's not a separate pot, it's all pooled in one fund. So it's all encompassing. Okay, so it's not, it's just part of the plan design. These are enhancements that the plan has always had and has put in. So. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a real basic pension plan, if you want the bare bones type of defined benefit pension plan, would really be only age 65 is the only unreduced date. Normal, if you retired any time before that age 55, up to age 55, would be 6% reduction a year. So this is your typical base pension plan. So you'd have a 6% reduction a year as opposed to an unreduced date. There'd be no bridge benefit. There wouldn't be any enhancements, and you'd probably be looking at a flat 1% final average earnings plan. So this plan is actually fairly rich. Gives you a lot of options, gives you a lot of enhancements, but that's also why you put in 8.3% or 8.4% and 9.5%. Okay. The bridge benefit formula is 0.5% times the final average CPP times your years of service. Again, if you don't have 80 points, it will be reduced to age 55. So, and again, if we took our same example, 0.5% times 54,940 times 25 years service. So up to age 60, you would get an additional $6,800 in pension a year. Again, at that point, that drops off. You would potentially start your CPP to keep that level type of income coming in.
So if you have a beneficiary, let's say you retire at 65, at 66 you pass away.
Yep.
Does this pension continue paying to them, or is that?
So if you have a beneficiary, what happens with the pension once you die? We're going to get to that. So there's a whole section on it, and we'll talk about what happens because it depends on the beneficiary. Okay. Good segue. So, forms of payment. Yeah, flip the page over and then you'll get your answer. So your form of payment does depend on your marital status. So if you're single, that means you don't have a spouse or you don't have a common law partner as defined under pension legislation, which means you've been living together for about 3 years. Okay, so if you're not married but you have been cohabitating with somebody, they will become your common law partner depending on the period of time that you've been together. So if you're single, your pension will be paid for your lifetime with a guarantee that at a minimum, the total payments made to you will equal the contributions you've put in. So if you put in contributions for $5,000 a year for 25 years, you're at a minimum going to get all that money back. So even if you died the next day after you retired, that money would get paid to your beneficiary. So at a minimum, you're going to get whatever you contributed into the plan. That's the bare minimum. On average, that's about the first 4 years of your retirement. Everything after that is paid for between the employer contributions and the investment income that the fund generates. So if you live 25 years in retirement, you consider it that you paid for the first 4, and the next 21 were all generated from the way the plan is pooled together and developed. Okay. So any payments will go to your named beneficiary if you're single. So again, when you retire, you'll name a beneficiary and it'll go to them. Yeah.
Can there only be one beneficiary when you're single?
No. If you have 4 kids, you could put 4 kids on there. You can't put your dog, but you could put your sister, your parents. So you can split it up when you're single to as many beneficiaries as you want. Preferably not to 15 people because then it makes the administration a little complex. But
1 or 2.
yeah, 1 or 2. Yeah, but we do see that a lot where if there's kids and there's 2 kids or 3 kids, then they'll get split a third in that case. All right. If you're married, the pension paid is monthly for your lifetime with guarantee that if you pass away before your spouse or your partner, 66 2/3 of the pension will continue to them upon your death. So if you were getting $1,000 a month and you passed away the next day, your spouse, partner will get $666 for the remainder of their lifetime. The idea is that it does reduce because 2 people don't need as much, or 1 person doesn't need as much income to live off of as 2 individuals. At a minimum, you do need to provide some sort of coverage for your spouse. It's a legislative requirement. So if you are married, a joint survivor pension is a mandatory component. There are ways to change that, and I'll talk about that in a second, but that's the default option, is that there is coverage for your spouse. If your spouse predeceases you, you would still get $1,000 for the remainder of your lifetime. Okay? So it only reduces on your death first and then your partner's spouse will get it. But if they pass away before you, then it continues at the same rate it was. Make sense? Okay. The bridge benefit. So the bridge benefit ends at age 60 or on your death if earlier, because the bridge benefit is there as a component for your retirement. If you pass away before that, it'll cease. Your spouse will have eligibility to get CPP death benefits, though, so they can actually start some of the CPP benefits early. So you have a few other options as well. You don't necessarily have to take the 2 that are up there. You have some flexibility because one of the things you need to do is say, how much protection, how much insurance do I want in terms of my pension. So there are other items you can choose. So if you're single, you can add additional guarantees. Guarantees, these are like adding insurance to your pension. So in order to get a higher guarantee, you're giving up a little bit of monthly pension because you're putting a little bit more protection on it. So your options would be a 10-year guarantee, meaning that if you passed away, 10 years of payments or a lump sum worth of the 10 years of payments would go to your beneficiary or whatever is left. So if you lived 5 years and you had a 10-year guarantee, the last 5 years would get paid to your beneficiary. You can put a 15-year guarantee on it. Now again, when I talk about the insurance component of it, if you had $1,000 a month and you decide I'm going to go with a 10-year guarantee instead, well, what might happen is you would get $990 a month because you're adding on certainty that those payments are going to last at least 10 years. You've bought protection. Again, if you took a 15-year guarantee, it might be $985 a month, but you're adding on layers of protection. It costs a little bit to have that insurance, but you know that in the end, there's going to be more money that will go to an individual if you pass away early. Okay. On the married side, you can actually go to a joint and survivor 50%, or you can actually increase it to a joint and survivor 100%. So if you want to say, I want the same amount no matter who passes away first, my wife or myself, for example. So instead of $1,000 a month, again, maybe it would be $985 a month because I've added insurance that no matter what, that pension's not going to drop. You may also choose one of the single options, but if you choose the joint and survivor 50%, or one of the single options, your partner or spouse is required to sign a waiver. So they have to sign off saying, you know what, I'm okay that I'm giving up my right to a joint survivor pension, the protection that's there. So why would they want to do this? Well, it depends on whether or not they have their own pension plan as well. So if there's two of you and you're married and you're both working and you're both covered under MEPP, well, maybe you don't need a joint survivor pension on your MEPP because they have their own pension as well. So it's situational, where if you don't want to have those reductions or you want something that has a guarantee that you can name to another beneficiary because you have two sets of pension coming in from two individuals, that's where the flexibility of switching those options comes in. But again, a waiver needs to be signed. They need to be informed, and you can't just say, here's a piece of paper, sign this. They actually have to do it in presence of a lawyer to make sure that they understand what rights they're giving up. So.
And this decision is made when you're ready to retire?
When you're ready to retire, yes. Yeah. So if you're making that option, then you would have to send in the waiver as well. You can say we'd like the waiver option, and that form will get sent to you, and then you would have to sign off on it. But it has happened, and unfortunately I've seen it happen too many times where individuals have elected a retirement option before this legislation came in to say you have to, at a minimum, have spouse sign a waiver and sign off on giving up their right, where and not trying to be hard, but generally it's men who end up saying, oh, I'm just going to take the joint and survivor, I'm going to get rid of the joint survivor, and I'm just going to take the lifetime pension because, well, it's $10 more, and I don't want to give up that $10, that going from $1,000 to $990. They pass away, and unfortunately then the spouse is left with no income. So that's why legislation was put in, because historically that did happen. And so now the protection's in there so that individuals can't do that to their spouse and you don't end up in those situations. Okay. So what happens if you quit? What happens if you actually leave and quit your job before age 55, you go somewhere else and you're not part of the MEPP plan anymore? So you have a couple of options. You can choose to start your pension at any date after age 55. So your pension will be reduced for the longer payout period. The 80 points will still apply. But again, you're not accruing service anymore. So really you're looking at making sure your age would get you to 80 points if you're going to get the unreduced benefit. So that's option one. You can choose to say, I'll leave my pension in the plan. I'll start at some later date and I'll worry about it later. It'll all be based off of your final average earnings and final average YMP at the point you quit. Okay? Or you can choose to move the money out. You can take what is called a commuted value, and that's a lump sum payment of the total value of your future pension payments, and you can transfer it to a savings vehicle. So a commuted value, what happens is actuaries look at the expected future payments, they assume you're going to start your retirement at age 65. You're going to get X monthly payment for the remainder of your life. We look at the average life expectancy, and then we say, okay, if you were to invest it in bonds and something fairly conservative, what would be the lump sum amount today that would equal all those future payments? And so you get that amount. And so that $1,000 payment suddenly becomes a $100,000 lump sum that gets transferred to you. And what happened, you would move that into a locked-in retirement vehicle. So it's called a LIRA, a locked-in retirement arrangement. The reason is you have to use that for your retirement. You can't access it before age 55 unless you have certain requirements. So financial hardship, you can unlock some of it, but ultimately that retirement money is supposed to be used for retirement. If your amount is small enough, it can get paid in cash. So if it's under a certain threshold, which is about $12,000, you can take it in cash. So that's about the only time that you can get a cash amount. Otherwise, that money moves, you invest it once it's in your LIRA, and that'll be yours to access when you decide to retire. So then it acts more like an RRSP because you've got a lump sum account, you've invested it. It's like managing your RRSPs. What happens if you pass away? So if you pass away before you retire, your spouse or beneficiary, so again, if you have a spouse, they are the defined beneficiary under the legislation. They become the primary recipient of the commuted value. So the death, if you die before retirement, you get a commuted value. Again, a lump sum of your benefit is paid out to your beneficiary. In most cases, that will be your spouse. If you're single, it would be whoever you, again, named as your beneficiary or beneficiaries if you wanted multiple individuals. Your spouse may elect to receive the benefit as a monthly pension instead. So they can actually choose to say, no, instead of the lump sum, I would like to start receiving a pension. It'll be adjusted for their life expectancy compared to you as a member. The other option is they can sign a death benefit waiver, and so the lump sum can go to kids or another beneficiary as long as a waiver is signed. So that one you have to sign in advance because you can't do it once you're dead, right? So,
Really?
Yeah, you could. It's going to be tricky, but you can sign that one at any point in time. So if you discussed it with your partner and they said, well, rather the kids have the money, they would sign a death benefit waiver form, and then ultimately the money on death before retirement would go to the new named beneficiaries. All right? Yeah, I'll get yours first. So.
Other beneficiaries overseas, how it's work?
If the other overseas?
For example, for
Yeah.
me, my parents are overseas.
So then you're getting into CRA and tax issues because the money has to stay domestically, but there are certain requirements under CRA and the Income Tax Act that will allow it to be transferred. Unfortunately, I'm not an expert in that part of it because it's tax law.
Is there any process there?
Yeah, there's a process there that you can move the money, but it takes a bit of time. So, okay. Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, they or somebody here you would have to name to be able to start that process for them. So, okay.
So if your beneficiary is not your spouse, then it has to be a lump sum payment.
If your beneficiary is not your spouse, it has to be a lump sum payment. Yeah. So you can't have a child or a sister that suddenly starts receiving a monthly pension out of the plan. Only the spouse or partner can, or common law partner can receive the pension. Yeah, because unfortunately, if everyone had named their kids, then you have a 6-year-old that's receiving a pension for their lifetime. It kind of throws the funding off of the the plan, and they may never go to work because they've got a monthly income already.
Exactly.
I could-
thought they would have to be 18 to be there.
Yeah. No, if you can name children under 18 as long as, but it would just go into trust for them, right? So you'd have to have a named trustee to manage the account for them, but you can name children under 18 as beneficiaries. If you die after retirement, your spouse or beneficiary will receive the benefit based on the form of pension you elected. So when we went through those optional forms or those normal forms, depending on what you picked, that's what you would get. So one other thing about the pension when you decide to retire that we haven't talked about is what happens if you end up getting remarried in retirement. because this is starting to happen a lot. We're going to talk about that. The individual that is named as your spouse or partner at the time you retire is entitled to your pension. You can't suddenly change and say, well, now I have this spouse and they get the pension if I die. That's not how the pension legislation works, because everything in terms of calculating the amount you get, in terms of the forms you get, is all based on the two individuals that are at that point in time. So just be aware of that, because as I said, it's happening more than people think now, that in retirement individuals are divorcing, that with a joint survivor, they are still the named joint survivor on the pension.
And you can't change that.
No. So if it's a single life, like if it had been waived, you can change the beneficiary after, but if it's joint survivor, no, you can't. Okay, so what happens if you want to start your pension? Who do you contact? How do you get in touch with us? You can email us at pensionrequestmeb@coglin.ca. Local phone number, there's a long distance number, and there's a fax number. So there's a number of ways you can reach us. There is also the online calculator. So when you're looking at trying to figure out when you may want to retire, there is a pension estimator on the website that you can go to say, if I retire at this date, what's the projection going to be? If I retire at this date, what's the estimated amount I'm going to get at this date? So there's tools out there to help you figure out what that amount might be depending when you decide to actually retire.
How far in advance should you be doing that?
Generally, we like a few months in advance, just because we have to send you forms to select your options. So if you say, I want to retire next month and it's 2 weeks away, we can process it, but then you're going to have a delay in the pension payment. You'll probably just get retroactive payments to your retirement date, so because it might take a month or two to process everything. But send you the forms. You have to make a choice. You have to send the forms back to us once you've made your election, and then everything gets processed in terms of making sure that the monthly pension will start. So ideally, you are giving this a little more thought than I want to retire tomorrow. I know that doesn't always happen, but if you have an idea of when you're looking to retire, that's when you want to start talking to us and trying to look at your optional forms and getting quotes. Okay? So your pension statement. Pension statement is the annual sheet. As I said, you get this sheet of paper every year. It updates with an update to your accrual, how much you have in terms of pension up to that date. And one of the key things is make sure your information is up to date. So what happens is in a lot of cases, especially when you're young, though we don't have a lot of younger individuals here, is you get this, you say, oh, okay, that's great, and you stick it in a drawer and you never look at it. Once you get closer to retirement, suddenly you start to look at this a little bit closer, but the idea is you should look at it year to year, and everybody's guilty of it. I mean, I work in the industry, and I can tell you there were years where it's like, yeah, that's great, and I put it in the drawer. So it's just force of habit, right? That's just how people are. But that's kind of what your statement looks like. Say municipal employees plan, they'll give you a date. So it'll be date as of date X. So the one you will be getting this year will be as of December 31st, 2018. It'll have your name, address, province, postal code. That's the information we have on file for you. Make sure it's up to date. If you're not receiving your pension statement, it's probably because we don't have the right information for you. So you better call us so that we can update it.
Are they sent out in March?
They are usually sent out sometime between March and June.
Okay.
They have to generally be out by June 30th. That's sort of the deadline. But yeah, spring, early summer is kind of when all those get mailed out. Okay. The reason it takes a little bit of time is because we're still waiting and receiving contributions and payroll information from all the employers through all of January. So we can't really process anything until we have all that information and start to do all the calculations. The information, again, so we have date of birth, date of hire. This is all your basic information. Normal retirement date, early retirement date, your unreduced retirement date. It names your spouse and your beneficiary. So again, if there's been changes there, we need to know about it because those are the ones we have on file. So if anything happens to you, those are the individuals of record that would be receiving your benefits. Then it gets into, well, what have you had? How is your pension actually calculated? So this is the data that's used to calculate your pension. So it looks at your service that you have. So your qualifying service. The qualifying service is the amount that's used to calculate the 80 points. So Magic 80 is based on age, plus qualifying service. Pensionable service, because it's a different amount, because you can be working, but you may be working on and off. And in some cases, qualifying service will just, even though you're off, will still go continuously through those periods of times. But pensionable service is based on when contributions are deducted from your paycheck into the plan. So pensionable service can be a little bit different than qualifying service. Pensionable service is what the formula is based on. So those 25 years times the formula, that's those numbers. So it'll show you what you had. It'll show you what you accrued in the year. That'll be somewhere between 0 and 1. You can't accrue more than 1 year of service in a year. So even if you're working 2 jobs and you're with 2 different employers in MEPP, total service you can accrue can only be 1. Your contributions that you make should only total up to that. So you may end up with a refund of contributions. The reason is, again, Income Tax Act laws. You can't accrue more than 1 year of service in the plan under the Income Tax Act. And then your highest final average earnings and your highest 5 years of maximum pensionable earnings. So the 2 numbers that are used to calculate your benefit. So in that example, we had the 64,000 and the 54,000. Those are the numbers that you will see down there. And those will change because if you're earning more year after year after year, your highest average earnings should start to go up. And then you'll have your monthly pension summary. So what you've accrued, what you had at last year's pension statement. So again, if you have last year's statement, take a look at it, compare it to this year's to make sure that opening and closing balance match up. What you earned in the next year, and then what you have at the end of that year. So the number you're going to see down here at the bottom, where it says total monthly pension at December 31st, payable at normal retirement date. So that is your unreduced pension if you were to start at age 65 or your earliest unreduced date. So again, that could be age 60, could be age 55 if you already have 80 points, but that's what that number will be. It also provides a summary of your contributions, what you've put in, the interest accrued on them. So there's interest charged based on Government of Canada bond rates, so it's not a whole lot. That's why it's a small number there, and what that balance is. And the reason this is important to you is because when you retire, at a minimum, you're going to get a refund of your contributions in terms of your total payments. So if you pass away before that, you know that's the minimum balance that you're going to get out of the plan, no matter what. And then there's a little bit of information on the government-sponsored programs. So what does CPP pay at 65? What does Old Age Security pay at age 65? And where to get additional information on those two. We're going to talk about that in just a couple of minutes. And then important notes. So a couple of things that you want to know. One, in terms of privacy legislation, what we're doing to protect your data. Everything is secure and behind firewalls. So data breaches that you've been seeing, we do take data privacy extremely seriously because we do have SINs, we have personal information. So we have a number of protections in terms of different firewalls, different systems we use, and we actually do test to make sure and have groups try to break in and hack us to see if we have any faults in the system to make sure that we're protecting your data. So the other part is the solvency valuation and sort of what the funded ratio of the plan is. The plan is valued on 2 bases. One is a going concern valuation. Going concern valuation assumes the plan's going to go on indefinitely. We take a look at everybody, assume you're all going to work or retire, but you're all going to live to a certain age, and project out the future payments that are owed to you over the whole period of time. And it's a long-term view of the plan. The other valuation is what's called a solvency valuation. Solvency valuation, especially if you're familiar with Sears and what's happened with Sears recently, assumes the plan winds up tomorrow. So we close the shop, we say, okay, we're going to settle everybody's benefits, we're going to pay you out what you're owed to today. How much money is that going to take? And that's based on current interest rates, Government of Canada bond rates, and annuity purchase rates. So we would go to an insurer and say, if we had to give you these pensioners, how much would it cost? And so the valuation is done looking at those numbers compared to the fund assets in the plan, and that'll give you a ratio. In this case, the assets are lower than what it would cost to pay everybody out. So it says a funded ratio is about 71%. That's actually gone up recently. Another valuation is due at the end of 2018. As interest rates climb, that funded position actually gets better. So because we've had higher interest rates, what you should see is an improvement in the funded ratio even with the markets that were a little bit more challenged in 2018. So that's been going up over the last little bit.
So does the government mandate how much of a solvency you have to have? Minimum?
A minimum? No. What they do is they require for single employers to fund over a very short period of time those benefits. So if you have a solvency deficit, you're required to fund it over 5 years and make sure you can get the payments to get that back to 100%. For MEB, you don't have to fund the solvency, and the reason is because you have all different employers in this plan. There's, was it through 200 different employers in this plan? So it's not, if any one employer, and they're all municipalities for the most part, was to shut down, there's a multitude of other employers. So the idea is that if nobody's, entire province is not going to close up shop tomorrow. So you don't need to fund on a solvency basis because we don't end up having the same situation as if Sears closes up, there's no backer to put more money in the plan. There's other groups that are still all funding the benefits. So there's still security overall. So solvency for this plan is less of an issue in terms of the funding requirements. We look at it more on the going concern basis because reality is this plan is not going to go anywhere over the long term because it's a municipal plan for employees of the different municipalities. Where it does impact you is on cost of living increases in retirement. So you want to make sure that number is close to 100% before you start dishing out cost of living increases to pensioners, because you want to just ensure that benefits are always protected at a minimum for what everybody's already accrued to date. There's a summary of the plan provisions. So all that stuff that I've been talking to you about for the last hour or so, they're all here as well. If you have questions, it's all summarized right there. So it's the key plan features. Again, it's on 2 pages. Then we have your plan trustees. So it lists the board of trustees, who's currently a trustee on the plan. We have one of your trustees here. So Tanya is in the back, hiding. There's a door next to her now. Yeah, she's running out. So if there's any tough trustee questions, so the trustees are ultimately the ones that are responsible for the oversight and running of the plan. So they have the fiduciary responsibility to make sure the plan is operating. They check to make sure we're doing our job, make sure the investments are doing what they should, making decisions around how the plan is going to be managed. So that's their role. They are your representatives, especially the employee trustees. So Tanya, Earl, Liz, and I can't remember who's placed Brad at this point because we recently had a couple changes, but they're there on your behalf representing you because they're the ones that you've either appointed or have been chosen by unions that are involved in the plan as well as a union representative. They're your voice when it comes to the decision making. So it's not all employer decisions. This is a joint board, so it's 50% employer represented, 50% employee represented. So you have equal voice because you're putting equal money into the plan. And decisions are made jointly by the entire board.
I have a suggestion. Next time you print this out, give us free microscopes.
Free microscopes. Yeah. All of that is going to be on the on your pension statement. So it'll be in a slightly bigger font.
Yeah.
On this statement,
Yes.
it gives you all the calculation, or I mean, it gives you all the numbers except the bridging. It just gives you the calculation for the bridging, right?
Yes.
It doesn't actually give you
Yeah. So
what that number would be.
no, yeah. So it gives you the formula, but it doesn't actually give you the bridge because again, not everybody qualifies for the bridge immediately. You have to hit retirement. So it's not on the statements for everybody. But if you took a 0.5%, if we go back to the first piece here. So if you take 0.5% and you took this bottom number here, the highest average CPP YMP, so whatever that number will be, and then just multiply it by this number, your pensionable service, that'll give you your bridge. So, okay. But again, you can call us, and if you have questions about how much the bridge is, that'll be part of the quote.
The amounts that are on the statement or the amounts that you get monthly in the calculator.
Yep.
What are the common reductions from that? Like it's a monthly amount. Like is there? I know that's going to differ. But like it's so for me, it's whatever that amount is per month.
Right.
Is there like what's the taxable? What are the reductions for that?
In terms of the reductions.
Like if I'm getting that per month from
Yep.
my pension.
Yep.
Is there a reduction, like, is there still a taxation of that?
There is. Yeah, and I'll talk about that because we're going to talk about tax issues because retirement is it might be 2 pages. He's really jumping ahead, not just one slide. No, that's okay. So we're going to talk about this stuff, and then what we're going to talk when we talk about using your income in retirement, we're going to talk about the tax issue because it is something you really have to pay attention to.